Today I'm here to help you answer the question, is the new Dragon's Breath exotic rocket launcher any good? Is it worth your time? And if yes, where does it shine and what does it do well? And maybe a little hidden extra bonus feature that some players might not know about, which I'll go over at the end of the video. And with that, let's go. A rocket launcher that OGs will remember from D1, Dragon's Breath is the newest exotic power weapon to step into D2 with tweaked mechanics. Here's how it works in a nutshell. Shoot a target and the rocket will attach to whatever it hits. While periodically exploding, rockets will also spit out fire all over the area, inflicting scorch. Sounds easy enough, right? Well, you also have this meter on your HUD called composite propellant. Go ahead and think of that as your fuel meter. The more fuel your rocket has when you shoot, the more fire it'll barf out all over the target and nearby area, and the more the rocket will periodically explode while attached to a target. The fuel meter will naturally grow over time the more you don't fire the weapon. TLDR, give it a little bit of time and you'll get a max fuel rocket eventually by doing nothing at all. Thanks to the perk High Octane though, you can speed up the fuel meter by igniting nearby targets. Because the perk doesn't specify if the ignitions need to come from you or a fire team member, we tested it out, and as it turns out, your fuel meter will build even if the nearby ignitions are coming from a buddy. Nice. High Octane also makes it so that when you eventually reach maximum fuel, the weapon will reload itself from reserves. Double nice. Therefore, in theory, Dragon's Breath is able to reach full power and auto-reload itself while you do absolutely nothing. Which sounds bonerific, but the bad news is that it takes a long time by default. In testing, I learned that if you're waiting on the clock alone for DB to reach max fuel, it's going to take a whopping 27 seconds to reach composite propellant level 5. With that in mind, you're really going to want to be heavily decked out in a full-on scorch and ignition build in order to make sure you're not relying on the clock alone. Remember earlier when I mentioned that nearby ignitions will boost the fuel meter quicker? That happens really quickly, so again, you're obviously going to want to use this with a big scorch or ignition build. Use things like Ember of Ashes, Ember of Eruption, and so on. So our first big question, how good is this thing's DPS? Will it be able to hang with the big boys? Our initial findings were interesting. I headed on over to my favorite ogre gal pal and found out the following. With a Radiant Well and triple solar surge, I by myself was able to deal about 1.34 million damage to the big bad, which is not bad. But unfortunately, that kind of damage doesn't reach the kind of output you can hit with a god roll legendary rocket launcher like ye old Apex Predator when paired together with a friendly neighborhood Gallarhorn. When using a G-Horn boosted Apex, we were able to hit about 1.58 million damage, give or take. Now, if you're wondering, but what if you had Dragon's Breath boosted by Gallarhorn? Well, you can't. G-Horn tells you right up front it can only boost legendary rocket launchers, which is kind of a big deal. So, while Dragon's Breath can deal respectable damage on its own, it can't quite hang at the top max damage level by default. You'll notice I said by default. More on that later. One big question you might have is, well, if D-Breath gets powered up by a full fuel meter and that meter gets more full up with nearby ignition, wouldn't your damage output be better if you had 3 Guardians all using D-Breath together? Well, yes, but actually no. Oddly enough, we found out that the more dragons you have on the field, the less damage you do individually. I swear to the Traveler it is true. Again, as you remember, I was putting up 1.34 million damage on my own. But when my entire team used Dragon's Breath together and I didn't change my loadout at all, check it out, less damage overall from me. And yeah, the scorch damage is probably inconsistent, but we did test this multiple times and it happened to be true every single time. We think it might be kind of a two-tailed fox type situation, aka gun that doesn't play well with its own siblings. It's hard to say for sure, but the numbers are what the numbers are. So if the default D-Breath isn't a top shelf damage dealing machine, what does it do well? I mean, it's really fun to clear out a room with, especially when you pair it together with a Solar 3.0 ignition build, but that does raise the question, is using both a power weapon and your exotic slot together to clear as a good use of your kit overall? I mean, only you can really answer that question. Forbearance is a standalone legendary energy weapon and would probably put up really good competition in that department. If, though, you're using D-Breath in an area where maybe there's both a big bad boss you want to damage and a bunch of little ads running around at the same time, yeah, that could be a nice little 2 bird 1 stone type situation. But is it top tier? I would say no, but maybe it could be. Remember earlier I mentioned Dragon's Breath can't quite hang at the top level by default? Well, that's because we haven't yet talked about the Exotic Catalyst, which does 2 things. 1, defeating targets with the weapon can cause them to occasionally drop fire sprites, but more importantly, 2, replenishes your fuel meter faster by default. Because your Dragon's Breath shot will do more damage with a full fuel meter, in theory, your damage ceiling would be higher if during a damage phase you were able to get a fuller fuel meter quicker. In damage testing, when pumping rockets into a target, Giggity, the igniting was able to repeatedly pump me back up to around fuel meter level 3 pretty consistently. It's possible that with the exotic catalyst, your meter, even if firing alone, could get you up to ×4 or even maybe ×5, depending on how good the catalyst is. Only thing is, we don't yet know how strong the catalyst is because unlocking it this early in the new season is a real grind. It's something I'm currently working on and will update you the minute I have it unlocked. It very well could be a situation like Witherhoard, where an OK weapon becomes phenomenal on the strength of the catalyst. I'm predicting it won't, but again, time will tell. I also know there's a ton of great mods available on the season artifact that could pimp out the performance of the D breath. Things like Revitalizing Blast and Argent Ordnance come to mind. I'm actually really wondering if Revitalizing Blast would be triggered by the Scorch of the Dragon's Breath, potentially counting it as an ability, meaning in theory, Dragon's Breath could be a self-activating debuff, which would be really fun. More on that later when I've finished grinding out the artifact. However, even if Revitalizing Blast did work with Dragon's Breath, that would only mean that it would be uber meta as long as we have access to the perk on the artifact, and even still, debuffs usually don't stack together, and depending on how good that debuff is, it could get outshone by something like Hunter Tether or Tractor Cannon. Potential exotic catalyst strength aside, here's why I'm not ready to completely throw my Dragon's Breath into the deepest corner of my vault just yet. There's one thing that the weapon does really, really well: keeping enemies in their mother-f***ing place. The stun factor on D-Breath is insane. Just solo firing my rocket into my Ogre gal pal repeatedly, she stayed in one place and didn't move the entire damage phase. Apparently, the multiple explosion proccing keeps them right where they are. Now, I haven't tested this with other big bad enemies, but in theory, imagine using this on a boss who moves around a lot and is usually very annoying to hit. Enemies like Nezarec in Root of Nightmares, or Captain What's-His-Name from the Grasp of Avarice dungeon over there. The dragon could shine in endgame PvE content solely from being a god tier boss stunner. Granted, you could use something like the Pyro Gale Titan exotic to also stun a big bad, but that's more of a one and done thing, and the dragon is apparently a never-ending stun parade. Time will tell, but those are my initial findings on the Dragon's Breath, which a lot of people were asking me about today. Updates to come when I get the catalyst and fully unlock the artifact, but I hope you enjoyed these early findings. If you're looking for more info this week, click subscribe and ring the notification bell, and if you want to see my reaction to the all-new stuff we saw in the Season 23 trailer, check the link in the pinned comment. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.